Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Co Blueprint. I'm Jeanette Mulvey, the Content Director for Co, a publication for small businesses from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Between the pandemic and the ongoing protests, we know this is a difficult time for small businesses and for our country in general. But the good news is we're here to help, and we'll get through this together. Today, we'll bring you ideas and strategies for reopening your business. We know that you're the foundation of your business, and our goal is to provide you with the building blocks you need to succeed. Our topic today is reopening. We'll be joined by two small business experts who will share their strategies for business reopening, and then we'll invite two small business owners to tell us about their experiences with reopening so far. But first, I have a few housekeeping notes. The first is that we will be taking your questions for the panel later in the session. So please type your questions in the right-hand panel of your screen. And if you see a question you like, hit the thumbs up icon and it will move it towards the top of the list. Secondly, we're taking a poll today. You can answer the poll anytime during the webinar. Today's question is, how would you characterize the state of your business right now? Closed, partially reopened, fully reopened, or open but remote. We'll reveal your answers later in the event. And before we get started, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Chase for Business, as well as our supporting sponsors, ADP, FedEx, MetLife, and Square. Now I'd like to introduce our panel of experts. Alan Thayer is attorney and founder of Innovative Law Group, and Michelle Story-Robinson is president and CEO of Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council. Michelle and Alan, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Michelle, I'm going to start with you. Your organization represents businesses all over the state of Michigan. So tell me a little bit, what is the state of reopening in Michigan, and what are you hearing from your business members about what the biggest challenges are around reopening?
Absolutely. Here in Michigan, we're actually as of today in phase 5 of our reopening plan. Many of you know that Michigan was one of the hardest hit states with COVID-19, and it has been a long journey back to now creating a new normal. Our businesses began opening some weeks ago, starting with outside workers. Last week, we brought in retailers. Earlier this week, bars and restaurants could open at a limited capacity. And then today, personal services like nail salons and hair care providers. At the end of the day, it is still a challenging time, and we've all learned in 2020 how to operate in spite of the unknown. But I would say the biggest challenge our business owners are sharing is simply understanding where the customers are. Are they ready to come back into, for example, retail shops at this time? Or are we still needing to look at ways that we can pivot and still be able to service them and salvage our businesses?
Right. So Alan, you're an attorney. What are you hearing from businesses in your area that are beginning to reopen, and what are their biggest concerns about the legal issues and liability issues around reopening?
So Oregon is just now beginning to reopen, and businesses have had questions. I think their first question is, okay, what can we do and what can we not do? And to answer that question, whether you're in Oregon or any other state, you need to look at the guidances from your state health authority, and in some states also guidances from local health authorities. That sets out the rules. Sadly, I've had some people talk to me and they think they know what they can do or what they can't do based upon TV news reports. Because of the nature of the news, those are just short snapshots of what the guidances issued by the state health authorities require. The second concern is, will we get sued if we reopen? Will we get sued by a customer? Will we get sued by an employee? The U.S. Chamber has been working for indemnity for businesses that reopen and follow guidelines set out by the Centers for Disease Control. And some states are looking at similar indemnity type provisions for businesses. But even without that protection, businesses generally don't get sued, or at least won't be found liable unless they did something wrong. In the negligence context, context, excuse me, is you compare conduct with the relevant standard of care. Generally, that is what are other people in your industry doing in similar situations. Here, the standards of care are set by these public health authority guidances that I mentioned. You can also then go beyond the state guidances and look at what's happening at the national level. And here too, the U.S. Chamber has done a great job of providing resources to businesses. Also, I would recommend the National Safety Council. They have playbooks for businesses to help them understand how they can reopen and what the standards should be. And then, of course, there are industry standards as well. If you're a restaurant, for example, I know that the national and state restaurant associations have done a lot of work in that area.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah. Michelle, I know that a lot of your members are manufacturers, and there's a big difference between, as Alan references, restaurants or salons or B2C businesses and B2B businesses like manufacturers. So what are you hearing from those kinds of businesses? Because I know a lot of their concerns are not about serving customers in the place of business, but about their employees being together. So what are you hearing?
Yes, definitely. Well, actually our manufacturers are driven by customers as well. Someone is buying that product that they are manufacturing, but you're exactly right. Their primary concern is making their workers feel safe enough, feel like the precautions have been taken to ensure that social distancing is possible and they can still do their jobs. So they've been extremely creative, and they're leveraging technology, wearing wristbands so that they can have contact tracing. So we know when people are perhaps too close together, because I think all of us have experienced wanting to automatically shake a hand. And the reality is we all have to get used to this new normal. So when you look at these manufacturers, they are looking at that. But I will tell you the other thing they're looking at, in addition to their employees and ensuring the workplace is safe and they're reopening properly, as Alan alluded to, many of their trade associations have done an outstanding job, in addition to the CDC, I have to say, with very comprehensive guidelines that help you understand how to sanitize your business, how to ensure your employees are properly wiping down equipment and things of that nature. But in addition to that, as we look at everything that they're doing, they also have to think about their downstream manufacturers. So those subcontractors to them that are supplying parts, for example, that they're actually utilizing. Because if those facilities aren't keeping their employees healthy and safe, then it does impact the entire manufacturing timeline.
Tell me a little bit, you mentioned bracelets. What were you referring to about the bracelets?
It's again, I'm a person that I appreciate all that the U.S. Chamber has done. And even in March, when we were looking at the unknown, I believe crisis breeds opportunity. And for entrepreneurs that really have the entrepreneurial spirit, you're looking around for ways that you can leverage products that you've wanted to actually deploy, services that are out there. There are bracelets that literally allow an employer to equip each employee with the bracelet. And if they get too close to each other, so as my example about wanting to naturally shake one's hand, which is what we do, this will remind us that we're perhaps closer than the 6-foot social distancing guideline that's there. In addition, there are some contact tracing pieces that I know some of our entrepreneurs are testing at this moment that would allow you to trace your steps. Because if you're like me, you might have forgotten every place you've been. Should you be diagnosed and need to be able to share that information. There are now apps and things being tested to actually assist in that process.
Right. That's interesting. I had not heard of the bracelets.
Yes.
So Alan, Michelle is talking about employees and employee concerns. As an attorney, what are you telling businesses whose employees are maybe afraid to come back to work, and how do they handle that?
Well, initially, I think businesses were concerned that the unemployment benefits were so great for many employees. In fact, in Oregon, if you were making less than $65,000 a year, you were making more money on unemployment than if you returned to work. But but as we progressed, I think businesses need to explore a little further. Recent surveys have shown that there are three attitudes towards reopening or engaging in various activities. There's the group of people who are ready to go. There's the group of people who said, well, I'll go, but I need some assurance that you're protecting me. And then there are those people who say, well, we require a medical advance before I feel comfortable leaving my house. And it's those assurance seekers that businesses I'm talking to right now that we're addressing and trying to speak to and understand what their concerns are, and then show them here's what the standards are, here's what the CDC is saying, here's what the state health authority is saying, and here is how we are complying with these standards. And please come back to work.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying, Alan, is that businesses are going to need to make sure they're communicating to their employees and, of course, also to their customers about what that new normal looks like. And that takes me really back to you, Michelle, because I know that you've said that businesses should be ready for a new normal and not be looking for when do we just get back to the way it was. Mm-hmm. So I know you have some thoughts about that.
Sure. The reality is normal for us is going to look very different. The benefit, though, that I think for an entrepreneur is that you get to shape that normalcy. And the reality is, not only, to Alan's point, you have to make sure your employees have a level of comfort, but if you're B2B or B2C in particular, you have to make sure your customers are also comfortable. And that for us gives us a whole new realm, in my opinion, where you can look at digitization. When you look at the average American household, recent surveys are showing 75% are actively looking for ways to patronize small businesses because they realize the communities that we all love to live, work, and play in are being impacted by the unknown. So as you shape the normal and listen to what your customers are saying, listen to what your employees are saying as to their level of readiness, then you can now define. If I were a small business retailer right now, I'm telling you, it would be all about digitization. I would bring my team back and I would be talking to that team about how do we have an online store that makes everything available? How do we have a pickup category? Locally, one of my favorite restaurants now they're not using a typical gig type delivery app, but they're letting their employees deliver to those of us locally that are patronizing them. And I, like many Americans, have eaten far too much food from restaurants during this pandemic because I wanted to support my local community. I don't believe we are alone in that sense. So what I would say is, as we define the new normal, look for the items in your business, the categories in your business where you've always kind of wanted to explore, but the market wouldn't really allow it. Now is the time to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Alan, that brings me to you. I know that you have a sort of take charge action strategy that you recommend for businesses, which really speaks to exactly what Michelle was just saying. So maybe you can share with us what that 5-point plan looks like.
Absolutely. The first is to know the rules, and we've talked about that before, the state and local guidances, the federal guidances, the industry standards. And then once you look at those guidances, develop your own protocols and do that in writing each step along the way. This is how we are now conducting business. And then communicate those protocols to your employees, to your customers, to your vendors. And the way you do that with employees is through training and through signage. And then implement your protocols. Sometimes that requires physical restructuring. That requires the plexiglass barriers. It requires various steps that you need to make to your workplace, and then enforce your rules. If you know the rules, if you develop protocols, you communicate those protocols, you do what you say you're going to do, and you enforce those rules, then businesses should be in much better shape to reopen, to stay open, and to avoid lawsuits.
Great, thank you. I am going to now invite our two small business owners to join us. So first, I'd like to introduce Yassine Teru, owner of Yassine's Falafel House in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Maddie Watkins, who is the founder of 202 Strong, which is a boutique gym in Washington, D.C. Hi, Yassine and Maddie. Are you guys there?
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Yassine. Can you hear me?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. So,
Yes.
Maddie, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
I'm getting some background noise there. If someone's typing, if you could mute for just a second so I can hear Maddie. So, Maddie, you own two gyms in the Washington, D.C. area, and neither one of them is open for indoor classes right now. Tell us a little bit about how, if you're not open for classes, how you're actually operating.
Yeah, so March 16th is when we were told we had to close our doors, as most businesses around the country did. And immediately I went to virtual classes because I didn't want people to stop working out. I wanted to provide a way for you to work out in your living room with household items that you had, and not really make the excuse of there's no gym, we can't work out. So immediately we started those virtual classes, and that evolved into two different platforms. One is mainly focused on our members. So I wanted our members to get the same feel of being in class and seeing each other, seeing the coach, the same kind of programming and structure. So we do those on Zoom. And then I took this opportunity to create an online platform that I kind of always wanted to, but never carved out the time to. So I created Strongline, which is an on-demand membership option where you can stream into a class, or you can also view that on demand on your own. So we've been doing a lot of virtual. Now we're starting to introduce outdoor workouts, but primarily it's just been online.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting some noise in the background, so sorry about that. Now, so Maddie, I know that you are starting to think about when eventually you will bring people back into the gym. So what are you thinking about doing there? How are you going to change the way that you are operating once they reopen?
Yeah. So like Michelle and Alan were saying, I think the biggest thing is to recognize we're not going back to normal, but instead I'm using this opportunity of reopening to implement some systems and procedures I've kind of always wanted to, but it just kind of fell through because we didn't have to. So the systems that I'm focusing on are, you have to sign up for class ahead of time. Between DC and Maryland, they will require the capacity, and there'll be a limit per class. So let's say 6 people are allowed per class. You'll have to sign up ahead of time. And when you walk into the gym, you'll have a station on the floor, and that station will be highlighted. It'll be at least 6 feet apart. So as you walk in, you'll have to come to that station. You'll gather your equipment and you'll just stay there. All the equipment, nothing will be shared. So you won't have to worry about that. And you won't be moving around the room like we may have been used to, but it'll be organized. It'll flow. The coach will be wearing a face mask. We got 202 Strong branded face masks to make it more fun. They'll stay on the perimeter. And then after class, obviously everything will be sanitized. The gym is deep cleaned, and will allow for more time in between classes for members to come and go. So by implementing these systems, by letting members know exactly how class is going to be run, exactly what we're doing, we can build trust with our members to bring them back, to know that we're following specific guidelines. They're going to stay in their station. They'll have access to their equipment, but we won't be sharing. You won't be having someone breathe down your back or anything like that, in hopes of building that trust with our members.
So this actually, Alan, what Maddie's describing sounds to me like exactly what you were talking about, which is, I actually don't remember the exact words that you said, so you can remind me, but it sounds like she's really acting in good faith, doing everything she can to protect both her employees and her customers. I imagine this is exactly what you were describing when you were talking about liability issues.
So I was thinking the same thing as I was listening to Maddie, and congratulate her on all the proactive steps that she's taking to protect her employees and protect her customers.
Yeah. So Maddie, I wonder, I live in New Jersey, and so we were hard hit, and we have lots of new rules for everything. And already I can see that it's a challenge for business owners to get customers to comply. So do you have any thoughts or concerns about customer compliance and how you will deal with that if it becomes an issue?
Based on the customers that I've experienced, I foresee everyone being very respectful of one another and the situation. Even with our virtual classes, they had to sign up in order to get the link to the class. And so I think I've built the habit with my customers. There's always a chance that people don't comply, or they come in and they get upset that there isn't a space in class for them. But I think just being open and honest and letting them know, look, this is what we have to do. It's for your safety. It's for the safety of the coaches, and just kindly asking them to leave, explaining how they can sign up for a class later in the day or maybe tomorrow. Just trying to explain why we're doing what we're doing. It's not because we don't want you in the gym. It's not that we want to turn you away. It's just for the safety of everyone.
Yeah. So we lost Yassine. He was having technical difficulties. So I'm actually going to play the role of me and Yassine. Luckily, I spoke to him yesterday, so I got to hear a little bit of his story. Yassine, and hopefully we'll have him back for a future event. But Yassine, who you all got to meet in our rehearsal, he owns 2 restaurants in Knoxville, Tennessee, falafel restaurants, and he is in a situation right now where he's actually allowed to have customers back in the restaurant, and he's actually choosing not to, because he says that the cases are still going up where he is, and he's not quite ready to do that. But he also was telling me about all of the changes that he's going to make once the customers are allowed back in the restaurant, which are very similar to what you're saying, Maddie, in that he's obviously moving the tables further together and training his employees and providing PPE for his employees. So he's in a very similar situation where he really needs to be thinking both employees and customers. Michelle, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about sort of how businesses can manage to walk the line between requiring customer compliance, but also providing great customer service, and remembering that the customer is always right, and how on earth they're going to deal with that.
Right. I'll tell you, I wish there was a simple answer, but the reality is, if anything, what we've seen this year in 2020 is there are many differences of opinion, shall I say, in our country, and very different experiences. I would say that the key, however, is communication, literally over communicating, not only to employees, but also to customers. I have seen some of our business owners are doing an outstanding job of simply communicating on their websites prior to you ever walking into the establishment, prior to you ever, calling them when you're making your reservation. They are communicating their plan. We require you to wear a mask. Here's the reason we require you to wear a mask. We want everyone to feel comfortable, but here's what we're actually doing to protect you. And even if you may feel comfortable walking about without a mask, we have other customers that may not. Not an easy conversation to have with customers. And this is a scenario where I say safety is first, and simply over communicating what you're trying to do to make this a win-win for everyone, and to ensure that all customers, and most importantly, your business. What I would say to you is most customers, and quite frankly, we have some very opinionated, strong-willed customers. I do understand that. But most of us can relate to the scenario that we want local small businesses to thrive. And that means you need to have customers that think like me, and you need to have customers that don't. So you have to go to the most conservative approach in terms of how you protect everyone, so that all customers feel comfortable in your establishment.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Maddie, I'm going to come back to you. I didn't ask you about your employees. So, it's one thing for customers, they come in once a day or once every few days, but your employees are there all the time. So what have you heard from your own employees about their concerns and what they're hoping that you will do to protect them?
Yeah, so luckily for me, I'm going to continue my virtual classes along with reopening. So I do have some coaches that don't feel comfortable coming in and teaching in person yet. So they will transition to more virtual classes, and the coaches that do feel comfortable can come in to the in-person. Also in DC, we rely on the metro. Customers and employees, coaches, to get to work. And so if someone can't get there because of the metro, they don't feel comfortable. Once again, I'll put them on the virtual classes. And then the coaches that do feel comfortable and can make it to the actual location, put them in the space. But there'll really only be 1 or 2 at a time because we do have such occupancy limits. So there won't be a lot of people, no more than probably 10 at the space at once.
Right.
So.
Thank you. So, Alan, I'm going to ask you a difficult question and probably a question no one wants me to ask. But I've heard this question from a lot of small business owners, and we've actually gotten it as an audience Q&A question in previous events. So what is an employer's responsibility if an employee ultimately just refuses to come back to work? If the employer is just unable to find an alternate role for them or a role where they can work remotely, what is the employer's responsibility at that point?
That's actually a very good question because it has a number of connotations. So for businesses with less than 500 employees, that has huge implications for forgiveness under any PPP loan that the business may have obtained. In many ways, it depends upon the reason why. If you need to keep in mind the Americans with Disabilities Act. If the employee was previously diagnosed with some sort of an anxiety disorder and they are anxious about returning to work because of the coronavirus, then there's one course of action that the employer probably ought to take. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you would engage in what's called the interactive process. You talk to the employee. For everyone else, though, at some point, if they don't return back to work, you probably need to inform the state unemployment division that they were offered a job, but they didn't come back. But we've heard state authorities say that, and we've even heard the Secretary of Treasury for the United States say the same thing. That's not a decision to take lightly. In one instance, I talked with an employer, and what he did was told the person, okay, we've taken all these steps. We need you back. If you don't come back, then we need someone to do this work. And if you don't come back, then we have to notify unemployment. And I think that's what businesses need to do. Start by talking to the employees, listening to them, trying to address their concerns, but at some point you may need to part ways.
Yeah, thank you for that honest and direct answer. I think it's a hard question to ask because nobody wants to do it, but I also think that there are businesses in that situation and they don't know what to do. So I appreciate your answer. So thanks to all of you for answering my questions. I'd like to give the audience a chance to ask you some questions. Audience, please continue to type them in that panel on the right-hand side of your screen. But you know what? Before I do that, I wanted to just look at our poll and see if we have those poll results. So it looks like 37% of our audience is open but remote, 28% is partially open, completely open, 21%, and then closed and other make up the other 15%. So that gives us an idea who our audience is, and I think will help inform our answers to their questions. So the majority are in some way open, really. So that's helpful to know. The other thing I wanted to ask all of you before I do the audience Q&A is I want to sneak in one of my own questions one more time. And that is, I wanted to ask about the protests that are happening across the country. And Maddie, I know that you have really been directly affected by the protests in Washington, D.C. So tell us a little bit about that and what's happening with your business.
Yeah, so 202 Strong, one of our locations, is 2 blocks from the White House. We are 2 blocks from Black Lives Matter Plaza. So it's actually been pretty amazing to be right in the center of everything. We had a little bit of damage to our storefront, but all things considered, everything is fine. But mainly, we are an open, so we're not in business per se, but as the owner going down there, we're really directly in the heart of everything. And it's just been wonderful to see everything that's happening in DC and all around the country.
Yeah, thank you. I know I asked Yassine that question yesterday also, and he said the same. He's been amazed by the demonstrations that he's been seeing, and they have not really impacted his business, but his sentiment was similar to yours, and that it was kind of amazing to be at the center of things and see what was happening. Michelle, what about you? You must be hearing from businesses in Michigan. What's happening there?
Right. And I have to say, I agree with Maddie's statement. The peaceful protests have actually been inspiring, partly for me because of all the diversity within them. There are a couple of things I think from the standpoint of an entrepreneur that I would be thinking about. And one of them is, one of the things that we've seen are calls to action. And when you look in particular at affinity-driven consumers, that is important, whether you're veteran-owned, Black-owned, woman-owned. Those are things that oftentimes we would not have talked about when we were advertising our businesses. But what you have to recognize, 2020 has taught us, and I've been amazed at the television shows that are doing all of these deals and steals and different things to help small businesses. But oftentimes you'll see that they are looking at a specific demographic. So I think part of what the protests have taught us are that our dollars do matter. So if you have an affinity and you want to make sure more businesses of a certain type in your area are supported, now is the time to do that. But that means we as entrepreneurs have to point that out. That doesn't say all businesses aren't important and all small businesses aren't important, but there are times I want to support a woman-owned firm. I want to support a minority-owned firm. And if I know they're in my community, that helps. The second part of this is, if you are a business that has been impacted by peaceful protests that turned violent somehow, what I would say is look in your community. I have been so impressed around the country at many organizations, including our own here in Michigan, and we are starting to create funds for those who have been impacted to assist them in some of that repair of the damage.
Thanks, Michelle. And Alan, what's happening where you are in Oregon?
Well, there have been protests and violent protests in Portland and even in my community of Eugene. For employers, social issues are always difficult, and this is certainly no exception. How do employers talk to their employees about social justice issues? And let's draw a distinction between protest and social justice, and then the destruction that some businesses have had to endure. Businesses need to speak to their employees, but need to do so very carefully. They need to think about what they're going to say. And unfortunately, there are times when people say the wrong things. Even maybe they're trying to say the right thing and they say the wrong thing. And that just increased the risk for employers. So hopefully, I would like to see some sort of a discussion about how do employers talk to their employees about these sorts of issues, and how do they talk to their customers, and how do they talk to the media, because a lot of us are really at a loss on how to do this effectively from the heart and in a way that we are going to contribute to the discussion in a positive way.
Yeah. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add? I read your mind. I wondered if you had something to add to that about how businesses could communicate to their customers or their employees.
Absolutely. Look, I think people need candor. At the end of the day, first of all, Blacks are not a monolithic group, so I can't say that I'm speaking for all of them right now. But I can tell you, for most people, customers and employees, a simple conversation and a simple statement that says, we hear you. We may not fully understand, but we are seeking to understand. And we are committed to understanding so that we don't ever have to return to this place. At the end of the day, I wouldn't get into cliches like all lives matter, blue lives matter, Black lives matter. I think that's a given. We all know that all lives matter. The issue is that Black lives feel endangered right now. So as an employer, as a person that is dealing with customers, as an entrepreneur, keeping it simple, not trying to go into whatever you heard on the news and spinning it with your opinion, but simply telling people you care, you hear them, you are taking steps, and you're willing to listen. I think that above everything else that we're doing is critical for people to know and understand from places that they patronize. And if you do that, you can kind of keep yourself, and I'm a licensed attorney as well, Alan, but you can keep yourself out of that fray that we get into when we start giving our opinions and all of that. I think most of us can say that as Americans, when we're concerned, when anyone in our country feels like they've been disenfranchised and systemically left out, whether we fully understand that or not, we all want to listen and make sure we make our country as strong as it can be.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. I'm going to now move on to the audience Q&A. And Maddie, I think I'm going to come to you first.
Sure.
So, this person is asking, so we know how you're going to handle people working out, but they're asking, and this would apply to any business, how are companies, and so yours, how are you planning to balance the safety of things like the bathroom and the water fountain, or just the basic necessities that companies need to provide that have nothing to do, with the actual service that you're providing, but the other things all businesses need to provide?
Yeah, so one thing I know is the front door, propping that front door open so that you don't have to touch the door, you just walk in and out. Water fountains, I would encourage people to bring their own water and not encourage the use of that water fountain. We won't be having showers or towel service, which is one of our amenities that we love to offer. But just starting off really cautious, maybe overcautious, and then as things progress and we go day by day, adding more in. But keeping it, bring your own water. Maybe we'll have water bottles to hand out or for purchase, and just getting rid of that water fountain. We have a bar area where people sit at. We won't have them sit at the bar anymore. Just coming in for the workout and leaving.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll put on my Yassine hat and say that I know he was telling me that, first of all, they're still doing only curbside service right now. But even when they do return inside, he had a whole strategy in place for how he was going to do it more safely. But, he did say to me, this requires a lot more employee training. And that's part of the reason he's holding off, is because now your employees need to know not only how to do their regular job, but how to do all of these other things safely that we've all taken for granted. Alan, now I know I can't even refer to you now as the attorney in our group, but as one of the attorneys in our group, this person says, are business owners accountable for screening their employees for COVID-19, and what should they and should they not do in terms of screening employees?
Thank you. Actually, let me begin by thanking Michelle for her comments on how employers can talk to their employees. Thank you. I actually took notes during that part. So the employer obligations for screening employees are set out in your state health authority guidelines. Generally, screening employees for health issues is a big no-no in terms of employee privacy issues and in terms of non-discrimination issues. In this instance, though, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has said that screening employees is permissible in this context. What a lot of employers are doing are asking questions and taking temperatures and steps like that. Actually, if you go to the U.S. Chamber's website in their COVID-19 resources, there is an employee screening guide with recommendations on the types of questions you should be asking employees and how often you should ask those employees. But every day you can certainly ask them, do you have a cough of an unknown origin? Do you have a temperature of an unknown origin? Generally, nervous, cautious business lawyers like myself would say you can't ask those questions, but it is clear now, at least during the pandemic, that you can ask questions that at least relate to COVID-19.
Yeah, it is. It's so counterintuitive because, of course, a few months ago, the idea that you would start asking your employee personal questions about their health, like, you would never do that. And you stole my plug, because I was also going to plug that guide from the chamber. It's really, really useful. I think that I am going to come back to Maddie. Do you have a plan in place for what you're going to do if one of your employees does contract the virus and how you deal with that? How do you do contact tracing? Do you tell your customers? What is your plan there?
Well, I believe in honest, kind of transparent communication. So letting, whoever was in the gym that they did contract it, if, my coach had it and then they coached a class, I would want everyone to be aware so that they can get themselves tested. They can quarantine themselves if needed. And just honestly communicate it and let it be known. I think that also builds trust with my other coaches, my members, and then we can do what we need to. But really putting the safety and health of everyone first before trying to just run your business and pretend it never happened.
Yeah. Alan, what are the implications of that? What are businesses' requirements in terms of informing their customers and their employees about if an employee does get sick?
Well, in Oregon, if an employee gets sick, the local county health authorities step in and start telling the business, this is what you need to do. And so there's a number of Oregon specific rules with which I'm familiar. In Oregon, it depends upon the number of people who test positive as a result of possible workplace contact. Interestingly, though, it's based not upon the number of employees who test positive, but the number of employees and members of their families who test positive. But if you have an employee who tests positive, contact your county health authority and ask them what you need to do and do what they tell you.
Right. Okay. I think I'm going to ask Maddie this question. I wonder if you've thought of this. Are you asking your employees to social distance on personal time? How are you dealing with, right? Because if they're not, then how are you dealing with that issue?
That's interesting. So that's not something I've actually thought about, but it's good to have that question and think about it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's up to all of us to be responsible for our health. And if you're going to work and you're going to be around others, to take that responsibility among yourself. I think it's a conversation I would like to have now with my team. Just be open and honest about it. But when they are in the gym, they will always have that face covering, wearing the mask, and be socially distanced so that we can eliminate any possible transmission that might happen. Also, we won't be close to one another. It's not an office setting, so there won't be too much time spent. Maybe it's just 45 minutes at a time, which is still something. But I think just having that conversation with them and letting them know that you are responsible when you come into the gym for everyone else that comes into the gym.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry for introducing another thing for you to worry about.
No, it's good to think about. There's a lot.
Michelle, this person is asking about using co-working spaces. In other words, continuing to stay remote, have employees remote, and use co-working spaces to get together once in a while. So have you heard businesses talking about, I think my question more broadly is, have you heard businesses talking about really changing their work setup and situation post-pandemic as a result of what they've learned during the pandemic?
I think most businesses are considering that. Part of our new normal is commercial real estate will look very, very different. The reality is, number one, I think we've all learned that we can still accomplish quite a bit from office settings moving to home, people working from home. So you'll see that there are major corporations that have said only 50% of their workforce will ever return to an office. And then you have some as bold that have said quite boldly, none of us will return to the office unless you desire to do so because you can work from home, quote unquote, forever. So I think you certainly see people now working remotely. In terms of the co-working spaces, I think the co-working spaces will still have a place in our communities, but I do believe the change in commercial real estate and the way we look at having to have a physical office that is a bit draining on our cash flow if you start to think about what we pay for mortgages and leases. But I will also say that when I look at personal protection equipment, period, and what we're doing within the workplace, I was astonished to learn when we started looking at reopening our office, which will still be some time. Most of our people can work from home and we lose nothing in that. But just looking at personal protection equipment and how to make sure our staff had that, because I was astonished when I read through the CDC about the transmission that can simply take place in spirited conversation amongst people because of the droplets and things of that nature. So I think certainly we will continue to see people work remotely. If anything, I think you're going to see a reduction in travel going forward, because we've also realized that we can host in some pretty unique technological settings. We can host conferences and things like that we need to do so. And I think people will be cautious until there is a vaccine or something that at least gives people a level of comfort that they're not going to bring some type of virus home to their families.
Yeah. Well, I have you, Michelle. We have, I knew that those bracelets were going to pique people's interest.
Yeah. Okay.
So someone's asking about more details on those bracelets. Do you know anything
I
more
can't
about
tell
that?
you the manufacturer, but what I can do, I know that the U.S. Chamber, you typically follow up with constituents. I can get that information for you, and I will be happy to share it, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share as well there.
Great, thank you. Alan, I'm going to come back to you. I have a couple of legal questions, two that jumped out at me. I guess this one, the more specific one was essentially like, what is your liability response? What is your responsibility to customers if one of them believes they got sick while in your business? So are you liable for that, I guess, is the question.
I think that goes to everything that we've been talking about this afternoon. The liability is based upon whether you took reasonable steps to prevent the transmission of the coronavirus, and nevertheless they contacted COVID-19. Businesses can only do what businesses can do, and they can follow the guidelines that are set out for them and enforce those guidelines. And after that, the business doesn't have much control over it. But if someone catches COVID-19 and somehow they're able to prove that they contacted it at your business, they still are going to have to show that you as a business did something wrong, that you failed to follow the guidelines set out by the state public health authority, by the CDC, the best standards set out by your particular industry. And the business people I've been talking to, they're looking at finding, okay, here's all the things that we can do to protect our customers, and we're going to enforce that.
Yeah. I'll ask you a second question while I have you. The person asked, how do they balance HIPAA laws with the need to let people know about potential exposure from an employee?
Yeah, I saw that question come through on the private chat, and I was hoping you weren't going to pick that one. I don't know if we know the answer to that yet. HIPAA, of course, is the requirement that you protect people's private, personal health information. And as I mentioned earlier, the EEOC has come out with some specific exemptions, and I don't know if HIPAA exemptions have been made or not. If they haven't, I suspect they will. But the person who asked the question is right to be concerned about protecting that information. I do know with local businesses, when employees have tested positive for COVID-19, the businesses have informed their other employees that someone tested positive, but they don't say who. So they protect the identity, even though the person had tested positive. Now, in a small shop, you may figure out who that person was because Joe is the only one who's not here, and he's going to be gone for 2 weeks. But to the extent you can protect the identities, do so. But just asking for employees how they're feeling, do they have a temperature, I don't see that as a HIPAA violation.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, I'm coming back to you. So I think this person says, do you expect small businesses to proactively embrace sustainability, human rights, et cetera, as a result of COVID? So I'm going to broaden that question for you and ask, do you see trends towards businesses just changing the way they're operating and thinking about all kinds of social issues as a result not only of COVID-19, but of this movement that we're seeing in this country right now? I feel like you're really tuned into what a lot of businesses are thinking and feeling.
You know, I have to say, I see a level of consciousness in our businesses. You're exactly right. That says the way that we have processed information, worked with our employees, communicated with our customers, all of those things we do now have to look at. What are we doing in terms of what does our environmental sustainability look like? What does it look like in terms of social justice? Are there things that my customers expect me to be able to do? My employees should expect me to be able to do as a business owner. And I see a level of consciousness. And I have to say, again, I'm the forever eternal optimist here, but I really believe the time that we all had to kind of take away for COVID-19 and the time of introspection and more time to read and do things that we typically would not have to do almost prepared us for this time and this period of kind of a reawakening and a renaissance and honest conversations happening on a multitude of issues. I think we're going to emerge better. When you look at 2008, for example, and you look at the number of businesses that we now know today that we hadn't heard of in 2008 because they hadn't yet been formed. I believe this level of consciousness and in looking at a holistic approach to business is going to not only catapult major corporations into a new phase, but I think it's going to help small businesses identify themselves and actually help differentiate themselves from their competitors when people see that they're serious about more than simply making money, but making a difference in our community for their employers and for their customers.
Thanks, Michelle. Maddie, this person actually has a very specific question about your virtual classes. So you and I talked about this. How are you going to maintain Can you make enough money doing virtual classes and keeping the number of people in classes in person down so that you can keep people social distance?
Ultimately, no, right? If I am only allowed to have 6 people in a class versus 15, that's going to hit profit margins. And almost all non-essential businesses saw a huge drop in revenue. I try to focus on what are some things I can do instead of focusing and dwelling on I'm not going to make enough money. So maybe increasing more virtual, but then also having an honest conversation with the landlord and just explaining I'm not allowed to do any more than this, and seeing if they can work with me. Who knows what'll happen there. But trying to keep my basic members, my membership in, knowing that consumer behavior is going to be very different, and people looking for a new gym right now is probably not going to be what it was in January.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. We are just about out of time. Michelle, I'm going to come back to you with one more question, and it relates to what Maddie just said. Someone's asking, how can any business manage to remain profitable if they can't operate at full capacity? So do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. First of all, I just kudos to Maddie. What an outstanding entrepreneur to have on today. I think she's doing all the right things. The other thing I would say, though, is in addition to conversations, when we're in a low cash flow environment, of course, what we want to do is do everything that we can. We want to accelerate the payments that are coming in. So working out with some of your customers that pay you, is there a way that I can set up a way for you to pay for X number of classes in advance, and I can get that money today instead of waiting in a normal cycle? Are there ways that perhaps we know that people are in small gatherings in most parts of the country? So are there ways that I can deploy my trainers instead of just having virtual? But if there's a family that wants to work out and they're willing to come together, how do I deploy them to do some things in very safe environments with small settings, so that you are actually looking at ways to maintain your profitability? Certainly, I just talked about gyms, but in particular, when you're looking at businesses, I think we often miss understanding what drives profitability. Like if I were Maddie, I'd also be thinking about, do I need to sell products? Sometimes if I sell more products, I can sell them online. It can be mats and things that people might use. I can sell a kit to people and have them be able to do some things, and maybe I make a decent profit off of that. Again, this us as entrepreneurs defining the new normal, and it might look very different. The first thing I would tell you to do, if you're saying, I'm just not that creative, get your staff together. To Alan's point, sometimes we totally overlook our staff, and they have many ideas and things they probably wanted to try, and they'll be kind of your own mini consulting firm if you give them the license to do that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And that will be the last word. We're out of time for today. So first, let me say thank you to Maddie. Good luck with everything. And Michelle, thank you so much. Alan, thank you. And Yassine in absentia, but here in spirit, we thank him, and we will invite him back for another episode. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Chase for Business, as well as our supporting sponsors, ADP, FedEx, MetLife, and Square. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you who joined us today. We know your time is very valuable, so we appreciate it, and we hope it was helpful. Please join us next week at the same time. We'll be discussing different ways you can re-engage your customers post-pandemic. And after next week, we will be hosting these on a bi-weekly basis. In the meantime, check out these great resources from Chase for Business, the U.S. Chamber, and of course, Co. You'll get these links and more in an email from us later today. Together, we will reopen, recover, and rebuild, and I will see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.